Thanks, Katrina. Hi, everyone. I'm Fiona. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Equity, Diversity and Inclusion at Monash University. I do also want to begin by acknowledging that today we're on Wurundjeri land, the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any colleagues joining us online or who are here in the room with me today. I am going to cover a huge amount of information about comprehensive training for staff and students to prevent sexual assault and sexual harassment in a very quick amount of time. I'm going to give you some case studies, go through a couple of challenges that are unique to us, and some of our next steps in further enhancing and refining our training offerings. And throughout, I'm hopefully going to give you some clear actions and ideas that you can sort of take away to implement in your organisations. And I know that, there's a lot I'm covering, but the conversation is far from over. I look forward to chatting with you all later today and tomorrow. All right. I thought it's helpful just to give some context about Monash for those that don't know who we are. We are a big university, Australia's biggest. We've got more than 87,000 students. Close to 18,000 staff, and it is a diverse cohort. We've got about half international and offshore students. The other challenge and exciting piece for our work is that we also have a global footprint. We have campuses. We have 4 campuses on the Kulin Nations here in Melbourne, but we have presence all over the world, which makes prevention programming interesting when we're trying to sort of adapt those programs for different cultural contexts and in different nations. So, Monash has a standalone prevention team, Respectful Communities, and that was established at the start of 2018 in response to the Change the Course report, which was the first national survey into sexual assault and sexual harassment on university campuses in Australia. This prevention team sits entirely separate from our response team. And in 2018, when the team was formed, I was the manager of Respectful Communities at the time, and really we were starting with a blank slate of going, where do we begin? There isn't an example that we could draw on in the Australian sector already that we could sort of adopt and model on. So we set out to do some of that research to figure out where should we begin. And part of that was liaising with our response team, the Safer Community Unit, to talk about what trends in behaviour they were seeing. And that's something we continue to do today. The prevention team meets every couple of months with our response team to make sure that there's this ongoing dialogue about behaviours and trends that we're seeing. The other piece we did is look to national resources like Change the Story from Our Watch, which is the National Primary Prevention Framework for eliminating violence against women. Various other resources have emerged over the years, but back in 2018, that was sort of a primary one for us thinking about prevention of this issue. The key thing that we drew on, though, was North America. And we specifically went to US and Canadian universities like our own because they have been doing this work a lot longer than us. Many North American universities, the scale of the sort of grassroots student advocacy for women's spaces, queer spaces, and also, as a result, sexual violence response and sort of resource centres really grew out from the 1970s. And not saying that didn't happen here, but it was at a greater scale in those nations. So there was great bodies of work already happening. And then many of you will be familiar with the Dear Colleague letter in 2011, which was connected to Title IX in the States. And that put, for the first time, this actual direct obligation on universities in America to actually prevent sexual assault and sexual harassment. So resourcing boomed after 2011 for this on every campus. So there was a wealth of information that we could draw on. And in addition, they had national bodies that had designed specific toolkits, and that's the one I'm referring to up here, the National Centre for Injury Prevention and Control, which has a specific resource, Sexual Violence on Campus, Strategies for Prevention. And that's where the screen grab is from. That is literally almost like a tick box that we use to build our prevention team and specifically to look at exactly what prevention programming we needed at our campus. The other piece through all this research was to look at what sort of further principles needed to underpin the work. Something that we picked up from the US and Canada really early on was that these programs should be peer-led. If they're for students, they're going to be better if they're by students, and so we've engaged students to design, develop, implement, evaluate all our programs. They're involved at every stage of the work, and really a critical success for our team. So that's one piece. The other side that's really, I think we've improved our practice a lot in the last 2 to 3 years, is making sure our programs are intersectional. We cannot look at the issue of sexual violence in isolation from other forms, from other issues like social justice, of racism, queerphobia, ableism, all these behaviours. We need to take that intersectional approach in understanding how we prevent it. And we've recently just finalised a new equity, diversity and inclusion framework for Monash, which is trying to take this intersectional approach. And we're really looking forward to sort of taking that piece of work and embedding that further into our programming. Evidence-based is an obvious one. We need to make sure that all our programs have that evidence base. In 2018, when we were starting out, there really weren't a lot of programs offered in Australia that we could just sort of adopt, certainly none that had a clear evidence base or had been evaluated to show that they worked. So we looked for programs that were well evaluated and or did the research to figure out what programs needed. And the other thing is, of course, is this idea of comprehensive prevention. We cannot be doing, while primary prevention is absolutely at the core of what we want to be doing, it also needs to be, this issue isn't going away. We need to also be doing secondary and tertiary prevention initiatives at all levels. So that's sort of the crux of our response. And I think the key takeaway for people here is probably, I think, the student piece is getting students actually involved in building this work. And the other piece is coming back to that, reaching out to sectors that are more advanced. So finding institutions, universities like your own, where you can go out in the States and Canada and learn lessons from them about what's working, because they're really ahead of us and we've kept our finger on the pulse in what's going on there to keep evolving our programs. In terms of what our programs are, we have 11 currently that are very specific to the prevention of gender-based violence. They're a combination of online modules and in-person training. You can see there's a heavy focus on students, and that's because coming from 2018, with Change the Course, that was where the crux of the programs sort of was focused. But obviously we've got other programs as well that really support primary prevention. What comes to mind is our LGBTIQA+ inclusion programs. We've got a whole other suite of modules and in-person training in that space. And because those programs are focused on, deconstructing these norms and stereotypes around gender, they're such an important piece of primary prevention work to eliminate stereotypes that drive violence. I'm going to now go through a couple of case studies of some of our programs we've been running for a few years now. The first one is our Respect at Monash online module. It was introduced, it was our second program we ever introduced in 2017. And at the time, it's now a compulsory module. Back in 2017, there was no way we would have considered making something compulsory, but it's a lot more commonplace now for our students. But what we did was we gradually made it compulsory for small cohorts of student leaders, where it was very easy for us to make it compulsory and make them do it and have consequences that they couldn't be a student leader if they didn't. So over 2017, 2018, we grew the program and got to a point where our student unions actually asked us to just make it compulsory for everyone. And part of that, I think, was just it would be easier to manage. So since 2019, it's been compulsory for our Australian-based students. Since 2020, Malaysia, and this year our students in Indonesia are also completing that module. What else to say? We get about a 98% completion rate for that module each semester. There is a firm consequence if you don't do it, and that's that you lose access to the LMS. So students really have to do it, otherwise you can't continue studying, and that happens in week 3 of semester, so they really have to do it. It's about 98% because there's about 2%, that disengage at some point, either go on to defer or just discontinue, so that's that cohort. We have been evaluating this program since we started. Since September 2020, which was when we last worked with academics on our campus to sort of redesign the questions and made some content refreshers, we've had almost 17,000 students complete the non-compulsory survey at the end, so we're quite happy with these numbers. And while we don't know the longitudinal impacts of this, and this is something we want to look at in the future, 93% of students at the end say they have this better understanding of support services. One of my favourite stats there is that 88% of students are motivated to go and learn more about respectful relationships as a result of completing the module. So it's great to keep monitoring this data and seeing how it's progressing, and we're looking to as well embed an annual quiz in our re-enrolment for students so that the content that they've absorbed here, as well as in our Indigenous Voices and our academic integrity compulsory modules, that students have to revisit that content as part of re-enrolment. Our other training that's been really successful, again, fully students that have developed and designed, is our Prevention of Gender-Based Violence 101. Runs about 2 hours. It is an in-person training on Zoom or physically in a room. Compulsory for all our student leaders on our campuses in Australia and in Malaysia. That's as far as we've expanded at this stage. You can see the numbers have grown. There was obviously a big drop-off in 2020. But we actually managed to, by transitioning to Zoom, we managed to get a really great increase in numbers in 2021. And those are our current, as of a couple of weeks ago, the 2022 data, but we're in the peak of our training period now for all the student leaders ready for next year, so we anticipate that number will sit around the same amount. And we're also looking at ways we can now embed this program into coursework more, which we've dabbled with over the years, but we want to revisit that. Our evaluation of this program is slightly different from the online modules. We do a pre and a post survey with students here, so we get a bit more interesting data around this. Hopefully you can read that, but that first one, 38% of students start with some knowledge about how to prevent gender-based violence, and it goes to 95% when they finish. 53% of students start with an idea of how to respond to a disclosure of sexual violence, and 99% post-leave. And this is based off 2021 and 2022 responses, and it's about 1,400 students completed the voluntary pre and post surveys. The other program that I'm very briefly going to mention, and I'm going to mention it because it's our only external offering, and I talked about evidence base and why we offer it, and the reason we offer it is because it is, last time I checked at least, the only higher education program in the world that has been at clinical trial evaluated to show it reduces rape and sexual assault and other sexual harms. It also reduces victim blaming attitudes. It is a program for women, and it's out of the University of Windsor in Canada. It's a really important program for us, and it is 12 hours of delivery to women. It means it's resource and time intensive to roll it out. And I think this is something that we're in a bit of conflict as institutions, is there's always this argument that things need to be at scale. We need to be able to deliver programs to every student, otherwise there's no point running them. And I actually really counter that view, and it's because of programs like this. This program can never be run at scale. We can't possibly deliver it to all women at all our campuses around the world, nor do I think it would necessarily be appropriate in some of our other teaching locations. However, it's currently the best in the world. It's the best evidence that we've got. So I sort of think if we're in a position to fund it, we've got a responsibility to give it to our students, and we focus it in on students in our residential settings because we know that's a higher risk. So I think that's another piece for people to take away, is that I think we need to strike a balance between everything being modules that can be delivered at scale for everyone, because we know they don't have as good an evidence and impact as sitting in a room for 12 hours and actually taking the time to learn. So happy to talk about that one further with anyone. In terms of challenges, I'm sure like everyone, time and resourcing are big challenges, scale for us, and cultural nuancing, particularly as we've got demand to sort of spread our prevention programming to different campuses. But that's a lot of time and energy then working with the local staff and students in those communities so that we're sort of abiding by all our principles, and also making sure that we're not ever putting content into these campuses and communities where we're potentially, coming across as colonialist in adapting content from Australia and just dumping it in another place. We can't do that. So we've got to spend a lot of time sharing our knowledge and then leaving it for staff and students there to equip and design the content for their settings. So that's a big sort of piece that we're working on too, as well as holistic evaluation methods for all our training and other prevention initiatives. And we've got to do we rushed a lot of online modules development in 2020 with lockdown here in Melbourne to get our content online quickly. And now we're going back and really taking the time to make them high quality, excellent sort of designed educational opportunities for our students. My biggest takeaway to wrap up this sort of whirlwind chat about our prevention training at Monash is that we started and became successful at what we do because of universities in the States and in Canada in particular, as well as some other colleagues in the Australian sector that were willing to share, that were willing to chat and to help each other out. And I think this is a critical thing for us to recognise as a sector, is we need to work together. This isn't a selling point. We don't get to compete on the issue of sexual violence prevention. And it's something now, Monash, we're deeply committed to sharing our knowledge and our expertise, but also taking that on from others. So that's, I think, my biggest thing for everyone. We need to get better at creating our networks, creating our group of colleagues and allies and students that can all work together on this issue, because we're all going to benefit if we can all work together on it. That's it from me.